Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you're watching this. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 2, and we are looking at essentially this idea of live by the sword, die by the sword. And this idea that Israel up until this point have been fighting enemies outside of themselves mostly, and now they are going to turn inward. And it is easier to fight external enemies than the internal ones. And this is just a metaphor for you and I and the great internal civil war that we have within our hearts. And so you have David, who is a stand-in, and I believe in this account, for Jesus. David has been anointed king by Judah, but he is not recognized by Abner and the other tribes. Abner, even though Abner knows, and we see this in the next chapter, that even though he knows David is the one who's going to save Israel, he chooses to prop up someone else. And Abner is the general, and so he chooses to defy what he knows God is calling him to do. And we look at Joab, who's also in this account that we're going to look at in 2 Samuel chapter 2, who also will continue to disobey David. And David is essentially the anointed king, and David is the stand-in for Jesus, and you and I can place ourselves in the role of Joab and Abner, which is two talented men, one man on the right side, one man on the wrong side, both knowing who the authority is. And in this account, the king is absent. David is absent. Both these men are acting outside of the will of God. So it says, Abner the son of Ner and the servants of Ishbosheth the son of Saul went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon, and Joab the son of Zeruiah and the servants of David went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, that one of them on the one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. And Abner said to Joab, let the young men arise and compete before us. And Joab said, let them arise. Then they arose and passed over by number 12 for Benjamin and Ishbosheth the son of Saul, and 12 for the servants of David. And each caught his opponent by the head and thrust his sword into his opponent's side, so that they fell down together. Therefore the place was called Hezkath Hazarim, which is at Gibeon. And then at this point the battle just erupts and goes on from there. So here we go. We are now experiencing the theme of civil war, and this is what I wrote. I just want to read it to you because I think it summarizes it well. The theme of civil war, brother fighting against brother, began in Genesis 4, the moment after God promised us he would bless us by sending someone to stomp on the snake. So remember, you and I are called to rule over earth, to bring heaven onto earth and to rule well. And yet in the very beginning, we pulled away from that. We listened to the snake, and then this curse was brought upon us. But God said, he's bringing someone to stomp on the snake and end this curse so that we could then rule again well with God, and heaven and earth could be reunited perfectly. When Cain realized that he probably wasn't the snake's stomper, he stomped on his brother Abel. The great tragedy is we are all called to build heaven on earth, to do war with the powers of darkness, but we all succumb to varying degrees, and instead we attack one another, both externally and in our hearts. If you want to look at this, you can look at Matthew 22, and Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount just reveals our hearts for all of its brokenness. But we don't just attack one another physically in violence and oppression, but we also do it verbally and in our hearts, which is where this problem begins. Joab acts completely out of David's authority and is in this chapter will continue to defy David's orders. Abner essentially knows David is anointed by God, but chooses to prop up Saul's illegitimate son instead. We looked at that. The problem is both men refuse to submit to the king, and you and I frequently operate in the same way. Christ has called us to put away our swords and to stop attacking our brothers and sisters, both externally through gossip and manipulation and avoidance, but also internally in our hearts. And this really is this cycle that we see these guys fighting, the cycle that we are caught in, has been essentially confronted in Jesus. So in Matthew 26, and we looked at this on Sunday, but I think it's really important to just pound these things into our head over and over again. Let me see where we're at here. Here we go. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas came, so this is like one of his brothers too. So again, this theme of brother versus brother. One of the 12, and with him a great crowd, and with swords and clubs. Here we go. They come with swords and clubs, just like what we saw with Abner and Joab. The chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, the one I will kiss is the man. Seize him. And he came up to Jesus at once and said, greetings, Rabbi. And he kissed him. Jesus said, friend, do what you came to do. Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew a sword. Here we go. Another sword is drawn. And struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back in its place. For all who take the sword will perish by the sword." And then in Luke, Jesus will also say, "Enough of this. Stop this." And then he'll confront everyone and he'll say in both Matthew and Luke, "I have come that the scriptures might be fulfilled." But aka, I have come to stomp on the snake, not on you guys and not on my brothers. So the problem isn't our brothers and sisters. The problem is me. The same thing for you. Your ultimate problem is you. We need to recognize that the real enemy is the kingdom of darkness. It is Satan and is the sin within our hearts that want to rebel against God and retaliate. We need someone, though, to fix this. And I believe someone to fix our hearts from all, both forgive us and but also to heal us, right, in love. And the only way we can do it, I believe, is by gazing upon Jesus. When you see Jesus in this account and you recognize, and you'll say in John, I can call down legions of angels to obliterate everyone. And you realize that Jesus had every right to obliterate you and I as well. And yet instead, though he had every right to run a sword through us for all the evil we have done, did, and will do, he instead has mercy, compassion, grace, and offers you and I forgiveness instead. And rather than taking up a sword, Jesus, at least the first time he came 2,000 years ago, he came with a cross rather than a sword. And then rather than placing us on the cross, he placed himself on the cross and died and overcame death and evil. And so the question I have for myself to apply this is, do we recognize this, that we are the true enemies? We are the people that oppose Jesus, and that he died for us and forgave us. And so what we need to do is ask ourselves, do we want to be forgiven? Or do we want to continue to take up the sword in our hearts and in our minds? And it's a really tricky thing to do, because I believe, at least in my own experience, I'm incredibly self-deceptive, I'm incredibly fearful, and I can be incredibly prideful. And yet, even more than all of these things, God loves me and calls me out. So what do? Well, one of the things we do is we come to the light. And it's important to confess these resentments and these fears and shames to a mentor or to each other. And so one of the things we do in our men's accountability group is we give a space for anyone to be able to share anything they want, and including these things, these fears and these prides and these shames, openly without judgment, in a place that is contained and private. And so that's one of the ways that I practice this, is I bring to light these things that I have within me, and these things that I want to resist. And by confessing them, I acknowledge that I don't want these things to some degree. I also make myself vulnerable to be honest about who I am. And so, in confession, I think, is one of the first steps to healing. And so, and also just to ask ourselves to be honest and to take a ruthless inventory of ourselves, to say, are we harboring resentment? Are we taking up the sword against our brothers? Because Jesus commands us to stop, commands us to take up our cross and die, and to love, and to confront the enemy. The real enemy is not our brothers and our sisters, but the real enemy is the spirits behind them. And so if we really want to stomp on evil, if we really want to drop our swords and stop attacking our flesh and blood, and begin the spiritual battle, the real battle, the battle that Jesus came to fight, we need to die. We need to die for ourselves, and we need to pick up our cross and follow Jesus. Not the idea of Jesus, but the living Jesus, and follow his way of forgiveness, his way of prayer, his way of not taking up his swords to obliterate his brothers and sisters, but trying to save his brothers and sisters. And so we do that. And how we do that is complex and nuanced. But the questions I have for this week are you drawing your sword against anyone? And you can do this both externally through gossip and through talking to people and through talking to the people you're trying to draw your sword against. To attack them because they're threatening something about you or your identity or something you value. Or you can be doing it in your heart. And maybe you aren't, but maybe you are. So why or why not is this occurring, do you think? And then the next question is, how has Jesus called you to die for others in love and to live for him? So if you want to wrestle with those and ask yourself those questions throughout the week, I encourage you to do so. Jesus, I just thank you for this invitation to to stop drawing our swords and to pick up a cross instead and follow you. And this action is an action of power and submission and humility. So I pray, God, that you would help me, help all of us to drop our swords and to pick up our crosses and follow you. And just thank you for forgiving us and not taking up the sword against us. Have mercy on us and have mercy on the people around us in your name. Amen. All right. Hope you have a great week.